All right, guys, we're here today to talk about first aid and particularly treating wounds. We're here with Val. She doesn't have any wounds, but we're going to use her as our guinea pig. First thing, it's very important. Horses are always getting some type of scratches and scrapes and whatnot. Minor abrasions, minor little bit of a hair loss, no real big deal. But if you actually get a laceration with some blood and whatnot, then you want to kind of treat from there, okay? So we're going to go over some wound wrapping, but the first thing I want to talk about is a first aid kit, okay? So as you can see here, nothing fancy compared to like some of the ones you can buy online. Actually, this is just the kitty litter that I had, a container, and I've made my own. So that way then I can get specific things I'm interested in. If you notice on my first aid kit, you'll see that I have baggies. I've had a mistake of some of, like, for example, my iodine leaking, and if you don't have stuff in baggies and containers, it's going to get all messed up. And so you want to make sure, try to keep as much, especially this wound stuff, you want to keep that contained. So I've got some vet wrap, and we'll talk about that today, some gauze wraps, even some duct tape. Because again, as you're wrapping, you might need that. Of course, some type of wound cleaning and treatment there, and of course, scissors if you need that. So I've got a lot of different things. Each person's a little different in how they like to do their stuff, and so even got my gauze pads. And so again, that's where I find that your own first aid kit really kind of makes it really handy for you, okay, to have available. Now, what are the supplies for actually having a wound? So let's say you get, probably the most common you're going to deal with is a basic cut on a horse's legs. Usually you're going to see cuts on their legs, and that's where you're going to need some basic supplies for protecting that wound. When you first get it, obviously the first thing you want to do is, obviously, if it's bleeding profusely, is stop the bleeding. Then after that, then you're going to want to clean it off, all right? And of course, then you're going to want to protect it. If it's a deep laceration or a big puncture wound that, you know, potentially you don't know how deep it's going, definitely want to call your vet. Not only do they may need to put the horse or give the horse some tetanus, you know, for a deep laceration or a puncture wound, but they need to make sure that no structures were injured that could be significant for the horse. So again, call your vet, but you want to stop the bleeding, then make sure once you got that under control to then work on, again, cleaning it up. Mostly then what you're going to deal with once your vet comes out and treats it and inspects it and what, is just keeping it safe and protected from elements. And so you're going to keep it closed, and wrapping becomes really essential. If you've never wrapped before, this is the time while my horse isn't injured that I need to practice the wrapping. First couple of times you want to do it with your veterinarian to make sure that you're doing it right, because improper wrapping can cause bow tendons, for example. You don't want it too tight that you can lose circulation, or too loose that it drops. So again, that's where your veterinarian can be very helpful in kind of educating you on how to properly wrap. When you wrap, you're looking at for about 24 hours, no longer than that. Then you want to open up. You don't want to be unwrapping and rewrapping. It's kind of like, you know, I've got a Band-Aid on here from a cut. I don't want to keep pulling that Band-Aid off, because then it's just not healing because it's getting disturbed all the time. But you still want to leave it on for about 24 hours, okay? Particularly some of the stretch bandages that we use, you want to go ahead and check that and make sure that everything is healing properly. At a certain point, it's just like your own cuts. You're going to notice at a certain point, you know, this is going to be healed up on me. I can stop and leave the Band-Aid. And eventually your horse is going to need to have air, okay? To allow that wound to finish off, you know, doing its final healing, okay? So it'll still stay kind of wet and moist if it's always constantly being wrapped, so it'll never finish the healing. So air is really essential, but you want to keep in those early stages debris and everything off of it. But eventually towards the later end, you won't wrap as much, but you want to consult with your vet. Now you notice I'm holding gauze pads, and again, you can see they're sealed up. We want to make sure they're secure, but the first layer on a injury is the gauze pad, okay? So again, on that cut. just like your Band-Aid. So I'm not going to put directly cotton on there because that cotton debris can kind of fleck off and get caught up in that wound. So we want to make sure that we do that. So our pad is going to go on there first. You can buy just from your little local stores or whatever, just some gauze wraps. And again, make sure it is, secured and inside, keeping clean. And so I'll put that gauze pad down and then I'll put a wrap to secure it. Notice, you'll see a lot of people talk about, vet wrap. Notice I'm not putting the vet wrap directly over that gauze pad. Okay, so I'm going to start with that gauze pad. Then I'm going to follow with this gauze wrap. I still, even after these gauze wrap, if you see how thin it is, I'm not going to put this vet wrap on top of that because it gets very tight very easily. So for example, if you see here, you can actually see that vet wrap, it's securely attached within itself. That thing sucks on to your horse's leg and you can end up really hurting circulation. So again, you need to have padding. Now, one of the things, instead of gauze wrap, if you can get from, like for example, your veterinarian may have this cast bandaging or cast padding. If you'll notice how much thicker this is. This is kind of like again, not only your gauze wrap, but it also is another additional layer. So if you get something like this, then you could potentially put that vet wrap after it. Again, layer up quite a bit before you do that, but you can then go ahead and skip on that additional layer after your gauze wrap. But if you notice the difference, this gauze wrap's very thin. Don't ever put your vet wrap right over that. It's too thin and you risk losing circulation. The goal is you need blood supply to that wound. Of course, obviously you want the blood not to be, too much bleeding, but at the same point, blood is good because it helps for the healing process. Hey, Val. And so again, if we cut it off by making it too tight, you're losing that circulation. So again, in this circumstance, putting this gauze wrap on here and not having a layer of cushioning, it's detrimental for circulation. So that's where, if you're veterinarian, you'll see we'll have this cast padding. This is not only a nice little, it will secure it, but you can also layer it up and it's thick enough that you can then put your vet wrap on, okay? Now, you can use, if you got that gauze pad, after that, you can use for your padding just regular old cotton. As you see here, you can see just a layer here. But never again put this cotton, hey girl, she said, I'm getting impatient. Never put this cotton directly onto the wound, okay? So that's something you want to kind of keep in mind. No, they're not treats for you, girl. You can, if you don't have cotton, you can use quilt pads. Okay, so after I do my gauze pad and my gauze wrap, then I can come through if I'm looking for, if I don't have that nice casting padding, I can use a quilt. Despite what this looks like, what big girl. Despite what this looks like, it doesn't look clean, but it actually is clean. It's just been well used. And you can get this in different lengths and even thickness. So this isn't really super thick, but it's thick enough for a wound wrap after I put that gauze wrap on. But you can get in thicker, like for example, if you're shipping a horse, you're gonna want it thicker than this. Same thing, you can get it in different lengths going downward, so that if I have a horse that has a longer cannon bone and I wanna really kind of wrap down a little farther down, then I would need something a little bigger than this. But this is perfect for, she's a quarter horse, it doesn't have to be really long. So again, you're gonna look for different sizes on there. These are great, you can wash them up, and so again, that's something to kind of keep in mind, because it can get costly if you're wrapping on and on and on, buying the cotton padding, okay? So when you buy that cotton padding, you're using it once and then you're getting rid of it. Here, you just have to wash it. Now, again, after you go ahead and wash or put that pad down or put the quilt down, your next thing will be putting on something to secure it, okay? This is a polo wrap. A lot of people use just a standing wrap. Your standing wrap, about the only difference is it's a little bit thinner, and it doesn't have this fleece material, and so it can hold a little better. I just have numerous of these. Why? Because again, I also use them alone. That's the only difference with these. Hey, big girl. Is that I can use this for if I'm riding my horses, like for example, we run barrels with her. I can put this on the leg by itself and it's used as an exercise wrap. But for today, we're gonna go ahead and use this in combination with the quilt for our demonstration. But with standing wraps, they're actually a little bit thinner, don't have that nice fleece, and so the only time you would use it is with a quilt, okay? So that's about the only difference there. Probably about the only negative side to putting this polo wrap on top of this quilt. Those standing wraps are that fleece is sometimes hard to work with, especially with the quilt. And again, sometimes you can't get it quite secure. So that is something, if you're just kind of learning how to do it, it may be easier for you to get that standing wrap and use that on top of the quilt rather than these polos. But like I said, we go through our polos, we use them so much for just the exercising part of it. And so we have all a bunch of these extras, and so they're wonderful that. When you buy them, you'll see that the Velcro's to the outside. When you go to wrap, you're gonna have to set it up so that you can then wrap with it, okay? This way is gonna end up, the Velcro's to the outside. Well, by the time you get done wrapping, this Velcro should be at the outside. If you start with it here, it's gonna be on the wrong side. So when you get it in your package, you're gonna have to actually unwrap. So this pretty all wrapped up, you're going to make sure you're gonna have to unwrap it to begin your wrapping process. And you're going to go ahead and roll it, take the Velcro, roll it to the inside, okay? You wanna make sure, so you can see this one's seen wear and tear, that's why we're using it for exercising and whatnot, but you do wanna make sure your stuff is clean, especially if they got a wound. But for today's demo, that's fine. You wanna roll it up nice and even, that way it'll make it a lot easier when you roll it on there. We've already got one, so I won't spend a lot of time doing it. We already have one already done, but that's one thing you do wanna make sure that you have, that it's clean, and that it's rolled up to that inside so that when you go to wrap, that you'll end up on the right way, okay? Now, when you go ahead and wrap, you also want to make sure, so just say if this was a cut, let's say we had a cut right here, we would put that, we'd clean it off, make sure that's not excessively bleeding, put that gauze pad on, then we would wrap with that gauze wrap, and then like I said, if we weren't using the casting padding, we would then go ahead and have to put another layer, either cotton or quilt or whatnot, within a final layer to secure it, whether it's this, a standing wrap, or you could even use a vet wrap on top of it, but we've got to have that additional padding there, okay? You do want to make sure the leg in general, even around the wound and along the leg, there's no additional dirt or anything like that, because again, you know, just dirt and then you put these wraps on can end up rubbing the leg. So you don't want to add to the problem you already have, okay? When you put your quilt on, again, you're just going to wrap around like so. Okay, and so again, my focus is if I had a wound right here, I want to make sure that I got that quilt over it. Then I'm going to use my polo wrap. I'm going to make sure that I cut that quilt's nice and secure. And I'm just gonna start wrapping. Biggest thing that I wanna make sure is that I keep an even tension. And again, that I'm not pulling too hard, especially when I come across that cannon bone. Now I don't wanna be too loose either, because if I'm too loose, I'm gonna get gaping that'll happen. But if I start really yanking as I'm coming across, then I'm gonna end up having that leg where I'm pulling on these tendons here. So I don't want to do that. I don't want to injure as I'm trying to treat a wound. I'm going to come up, and you notice I kind of started in the middle, I went down, and then came back up. And there you go. You can finish up like so. Okay? All right. And again, like I said, you know, a little bit dirty. I'd like to have something a little bit cleaner for a wound, but for demonstration, that's fine. So you can see even overlap going all the way down and back. Okay, no gaping. I can get a finger in there, but it's nice and snug. so it's not too tight. And of course with the quilt, I know, so like I'm always hesitant about losing circulation and worried about it being too tight. So with the quilt, I know that I'm gonna be safe with that. Probably about your only problem is if you get it too loose, it's gonna start dropping down, and that can maybe pull on that pad and kind of shift on that wound. So those are some of those things you wanna kind of think about. Again, once I have it on, I do wanna make sure that, you know, every 24 hours I'm opening it up, cleaning the wound, looking at it, and treating it. And obviously consult with your veterinarian. As I mentioned before, one of the biggest problems we get into is knowing when to then go ahead and undo that wrap and leave it off completely. Sometimes I'll go ahead, let's say if I'm cleaning their stalls, I'll put them in a cross tie, leave it open, not wrap it for a little while they're standing in the cross tie and cleaning their stalls, and then I'll do it. And I might say that a little bit. And then eventually I want to leave it open completely. Making that decision, because if you do it too soon, it may still be really raw. And so you don't want to get it irritated, infected, whatnot. You wait too late and it may not heal. It may take longer to heal. One of the biggest problems we get with legs is what we call proud flesh. And proud flesh is because as that tissue is trying to heal and they have movement on that leg, it could end up causing kind of an over-exaggeration of that healing, you know, cells as it's trying to heal up that wound. That proud flesh, again, that's where we can prevent that by timing it just right and treating it just right. Probably the easiest prevention is if it's in an area where the vet can stitch it, if it's a laceration, that can prevent that altogether. But a lot of us don't get the luxury of that, and that's where you got to be really careful. Restricting movement is really helpful. So yeah, with this horse, if she had a cut and I got that wrap on there, while it may not seem significant, I'm going to keep her in her stall just to restrict that movement. And even particularly as it's, you know, I'm starting to let it open up and not have that wrap on it, I'm going to watch that she doesn't get too much movement that might pull that skin and cause that proud flesh to develop. If it starts developing, unfortunately, your vet has to come in, clean it all off, pretty much like reopen that whole wound, and you got to start that process over again. So that's something you got to be really considerate about in that wound healing process, okay? So that's just kind of a short tip. Again, make sure you consult your veterinarian. Just some basic things that any horse owner would want to know about wound healing and treatment.